So this morning I want to start by just acknowledging what is, I think, in this room a well-known fact. I am not the riskiest of risk takers. Anybody shocked? Anyone? You know, if you're shocked, sit down. So like Nathan gets up here and he tells these stories about the crazy things he does at the skate park and on his mountain bike and on the ski hills, and I don't do that. And Roy gets up here and he talks about the things he does with machines that often sound quite dangerous, and I cringe a little bit. And these are the things they do when they're relaxing. And you'll notice I don't tell those stories, right? Now, I could come up with all sorts of explanations for why I'm not much of a risk taker. I've been disabled since childhood, and so, you know, I didn't have a lot of opportunities to practice these things when I was little, and, you know, the slide was only 4 feet off the ground instead of 12 or whatever it is, and maybe, I know I'm still little. You're not wrong. The slide should still be 4 feet off the ground, then maybe it would be okay. Maybe it's just a perspective thing. Yeah, I hear you. Maybe it's that I had a lot of pain as a kid and I was just like, hey, I've had enough pain, we don't need to try that. And like, on that note, I have this really overactive imagination, and I'm very good at being able to imagine what could possibly go wrong in all of the myriad ways that it could go wrong before I try something. And so, you know, maybe that contributed to it somehow. But the truth of the matter is, risk is not really my thing. And that's particularly true when it comes to anything that involves steep inclines or speed or height. As Michelle says, I'm still not very tall, which means that it was a little bit of an odd thing I did back when I was 16, and I decided to sign myself up to do the high ropes course at camp for an activity one day. We could, in fact, wonder about what I was thinking when I signed up for it, but sign up for it I did, and I let everybody else in the group go first, and I watched to figure out how this was going to work. And, you know, they climb up to the top and they strap on an extra harness, an extra rope to their harness, and then they let go, and then they swee, and everybody's happy. And then it was my turn. And so I climbed up to the top, I think a lot slower than everybody else, but I did it. And I got the other rope attached to my harness, and I sat down. I had that part down pat, and then I looked down. That might have been a mistake, because then I froze. And I didn't freeze for a minute or two. I froze for 20 minutes. I'd watched everyone else. I knew that their ropes on their harness had worked. I had talked myself through it 10,000 times. This was the plan. I was going to do it. I was going to conquer this fear. And I was there because I signed myself up for this adventure. This was like on purpose. But I was still terrified. How could I trust that this rope was going to work on this harness this time? You know, it's one thing to see it with everybody else, another thing to see it on me. Or more to the point, like, how could I trust that my body wasn't going to let me down? You know, I don't know whether you know this or not, but some people have, like, super bodies and some people have, like, less super bodies in certain areas. I don't know whether you've ever noticed this. Like some people can go to the grocery store and choose any food from any aisle, and provided it is prepared in the correct way, they can eat it and not have an anaphylactic reaction. That's a super body, okay? And then there's these other people who are over the age of 40 and can read small print without taking out their glasses or doing this thing. You've all seen people do this thing, however old you are. That's a super body, right? That's a superpower. And mine, even at 16, I knew I did not have a super body when it came to traveling through space without getting injured. I had already learned this fact about myself. But finally, with more support than should have been necessary from the instructor, I actually let go. And I swung. I did. And the rope didn't break. And the harness didn't fail. And I swung out and back and out and back for the 3 or 4 minutes that it takes. And it was exhilarating. It was amazing. It was fantastic. I got to the end and I really wanted to go again. Only some doofus had taken up all the time and we had to go back to our cabins. Like, what was that all about? You could say I believed that day in the safety of the ropes course. However, if you had watched me the next time I got to a ropes course, which admittedly was 20 years later, with my family, you would have seen that I, again, needed to be coaxed up and again needed to be coaxed down off of all of the tops of all of the platforms. So the belief was a little bit circumstantial at best. So this morning, we want to try to finish the fourth chapter of John. Everybody ready for this? If you've been at Vox for a while, you know that we do not progress through the books of the Bible very quickly when we're doing Bible studies. So yes, we started in September, and yes, it's the last day of November, and we are going to finish John 4. As far as I'm concerned, that's sort of us like flying through it. So that's pretty good. Like, and the thing about it is, like, Jesus is also sort of flying through his ministry at this point. We had almost the entire chapter of John 4 with him in this conversation with the Samaritan woman. It actually took us 2 weeks to do one story that way. But now we hear that he is back in Cana in Galilee, the place where he first turned the water into wine. I wonder how much they were still talking about that story when he got back. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we got some water, Jesus. But he was back, and we pick up the passage here in John 4:46. While Jesus was in Galilee, he returned to the village of Cana where he had turned the water into wine. And there was an official in Capernaum whose son was sick. And when the man heard that Jesus had come from Judea, he went and begged him to keep his son from dying. First of all, who is this man? Nathan keeps encouraging us to get inside the story. And to do that, we need to catch the detail of what's going on with this guy. He's an official in Capernaum. That's what it says in this translation. In another translation, it says he was a royal official. Okay? So a lot of the time in the Gospels, if someone who isn't a Jew comes to talk to Jesus, there's this whole thing where the authors explain why he was worthy or she was appropriate for Jesus to give this message to or not give this message to. Why they should still count or not count. But we don't get any indication one way or the other with this guy. No suggestion that he's a Jew, no suggestion that he's godly in any shape or way. All we get is that he's an official. So I started wondering, like, did he count the tax dollars that had come in from Galilee? Did he maybe oversee the billeting of those Roman soldiers who were in the region? It wasn't me, I didn't do it. And maybe he was responsible for procuring workers for the big building projects that were happening in Capernaum at the time. Either way, there's no real indication that he's particularly important. There's no high rank mentioned. There's no extra points that he's got for doing anything special. He's just an average white-collar government guy from the leading elite overlords of the region. That's it. That's all we know. That's who he is. Except we've got 2 more clues about who he is. We know that he's a dad. So presumably he goes home to his household, to his kid, each day at the end of work. He goes and sits at the table and hears the stories of the day and gets flustered by all the noise around him as he tries to read the news on the tablet that he picked up at the local tablet shop down the street on the way home, right? And we know that he's heartbroken right now because his son is so ill that the only thing that's possible that could happen is he will die. So then I got thinking a little bit about this son. Like, we know nothing about him. We've got nothing to go on, other than that he's on death's door. We don't know how old he is. Like, is he 2 or is he 14? We don't know whether he's somewhere in between. You know, how old are you? 9. Maybe he's 9, right? You don't know. Maybe he's 11. Who knows? We don't know whether he's an only child, a middle child, you know, the youngest of 8. We don't know whether he has brothers or sisters. Like let's face it, it changes something if you have brothers or if you have sisters in your life, right? They're a little bit different from each other. We don't know whether his mom's still alive. Maybe she died in childbirth. We know nothing about what he's sick with either. Like, does he have malaria, measles, smallpox, leukemia? We have no idea. But we know that his father is beside himself. How do we know that? We know that because he is a royal official, which means he has servants and slaves and all sorts of people he could order around. But he doesn't send any of them to see Jesus. He doesn't trust anyone else with this mission except for himself. He goes himself to Cana. It's a journey of at least 2 days' walk because he hears that Jesus is back. And although the text doesn't tell us this, we can assume that this means he believes in Jesus enough to make the trek to Cana, to see him, and ask him for healing for his son. Have you ever read the word believe in the Bible and wondered about it? I got wondering about it this week. Like, the text doesn't use the word here. It's going to in the next few verses, and we'll get to those. But these are the actions of a man who believes something about Jesus. He has enough belief to take one look at his son and where his son is at physically and decide to set out on a 2-day trip to Cana to try to get Jesus' attention. It's not a ton of belief, but it's not nothing. Because, you know what, if you knew your son was about to die and you didn't think you had a chance of finding someone who could heal him, you wouldn't leave his side. Maybe it's about equal to the kind of belief I had that allowed me to climb to the top of the tower. It got me there fine, but it turns out that wasn't really enough belief to easily get me back down again. Sorry, guys. Now, Trevor told me another story about climbing this week. He told me a story about the first time he met an auto belay system. So for those of you who aren't familiar with climbing, when you climb indoors at rock climbing places, they usually have this system for belaying you. This is true outdoors as well, actually. You know, you have a rope and you get it clipped in as you go up, and then the other end of the rope is usually held by somebody at the bottom. And they hold on to it, and then as long as they've got it, thank you, Rhonda. You're gonna have to come all the way up here because I won't be able to reach it from the floor.
That's my favorite.
Thank you. That will help. Thank you very much. I will just hold it. Yeah, thank you. So the belay system, you know, the rope goes up, you go through all the clips, and it comes back down. And that's great. There's somebody at the bottom, and they hold the other end of the line. And the idea is, if for some reason you were to slip and you were to fall off the rope, or fall off the wall, sorry, then the rope would catch and it would hold. And you wouldn't fall down and get injured or worse. And so usually there's a person at the other end of the system. But sometimes now in rock gyms, they have this auto belay system. And the auto belay system is a machine, like on the picture up there, and it's supposed to catch you instead. So there's no human being at the bottom of the wall holding the rope. It's just this machine. And the first time Trevor tried one of these, he climbed up to the top just fine. He didn't slip or anything, so he didn't need to use it there. He got to the top, and he looked at it, and he thought, I don't know whether I can trust this. And he looked down, and he's like, that's a long way to go if I can't trust this. And so you know what he did? He climbed his way back down the wall, holding onto the wall the entire way down. And then he looked around and he's like, well, that was a lot of extra work. I don't know whether I want to do that every time, but like other people, they seem to be trusting these auto belay systems. So maybe I could trust it. So he climbed up a couple of feet and he let go. Nothing happened. The auto belay system did not kick in. He's like, see, I was right to not trust this. See these risk takers, they just trust things willy-nilly. I checked them. That was a good idea. But then he looked around and they were still using them. So he went up a little bit higher, and maybe 4 feet this time, and he let go. And he dropped the first couple of feet, and then it caught for the last couple of feet. So he climbed up a little bit higher, and he tried it again. A little bit higher, and he tried it again. He finally got to the top, and he tried it, and he let go. And what had happened was that he had developed a belief in the auto belay system, right? When he started, he didn't believe in it, and by the end, he could trust it, right? So let's go back to our passage this morning. Remember the man that had heard that Jesus had come from Judea, so he went and begged him to keep his son from dying. And Jesus told the official, you won't have faith unless you see miracles and wonders. And the man replied, Lord, please come before my son dies. Jesus then said, your son will live. Go home to him. The man believed Jesus and started back home. Now we could spend a while on verse 48 if we wanted to. There's a number of things we could probably say about it. I'm not going to do that today. But just because Nathan or Roy or I don't say something from the front, we don't unpack it, doesn't mean that you can't during the week. So if you get really excited about this bit, if it doesn't make sense to you, if you're curious about it, whatever, and you want to investigate it this week, I really encourage you to sit down and do that work. And if you feel like you need some help figuring out where to start, call me up, call Nathan up, call Roy up. Let's give you the tools you need to be able to do that study. But right now, we're going to skip over verse 48 and just move on. Because honestly, that's actually what Jesus does here. Jesus gives him this response. And, sorry, that's not what Jesus does here. That's what the man does here. Because Jesus gives him this response, and the man just returns and asks the questions again. Please, my son is dying. I beg you. He's not trying to score any points about messiahship. He's not interested in a theological argument. He's there because he is desperate to save his son. That is the only thing he can think about right now. And Jesus sees that. And he honors that. He tells him that his son is going to live. And without having any evidence to prove it, apart from Jesus' word, the man believes and starts heading home. I couldn't help but think that there must be more belief here than when the man had originally set out from Capernaum. Right? Maybe it's like Trevor when he had worked his way carefully up the wall at the climbing gym on the auto belay, checking every few feet, and he finally decided that it was probably safe enough to let go at the top now. Anyway, there's just enough belief to get him to turn around and head home. But I couldn't help but wonder whether maybe there were still some doubts, still some questions, you know? Like maybe he gets a kilometer or two down the road and the fear and the dread and the anguish, they rise up again. Maybe he only leaves and heads for home because he figures he's got out of the conversation the best he's gonna get and there's no real point in staying any longer. Like either way, I think, although it's the first time it's written out, this is the second time we encounter this man's belief, and I think this time his belief is a little bit firmer, maybe, than the last time. It's not the last time we're going to find this word belief in the passage, though. So this past summer, I don't know what you were doing, twiddling your thumbs, waiting for COVID to be over, but we decided to get into climbing on TV, like watching somebody else do it in a really big way. It was the first summer that climbing was in the Olympics. And they had this new system where they combined speed climbing, which is how fast can you get to the top of the wall, with bouldering, which is these climbing puzzles that aren't too high up, and lead climbing, which is the kind of climbing you need the Belay System for. And so we watched this a bunch. In fact, we watched all of the men's preliminaries and finals and all of the women's preliminaries and finals. And then, because there was still COVID, we watched all of the World Cup championships of climbing, which is basically the same guys and the same gals doing the same things, only in a different room with some different puzzles, you know. Just slight variations on a theme, but you know how boredom works. And it was exhilarating to watch them and incredible and also pretty safe, right? Because there's these great big mats on the floor and they've got really good, well-trained belay people there and I wasn't really too scared for them. I wasn't too worried that any of them were gonna die or even break a leg or anything and I could get excited about the complexity and the technicality of the challenges without being terrified that it would suddenly go very, very badly for one of them. But then Trevor showed me a video this week of one of the guys who was in both of the Olympics, and the World Cup. His name is Andra. And by some accounts, he is the best climber currently on the circuit, although he did not win either of those events. And I realized, watching this video, that although the Olympic climbs may have been fun for him, it was a fun in a sort of amateurish sort of way. For Andra, I don't know whether they were that exciting. Because one day, this guy decided he wanted to try the hardest ranked rock face in the world. Climbing has these ranking systems, and I don't quite understand it, but I think this is a 15.4, whatever that means. And a climb like this would usually take a climber many attempts. They would go to the wall, they would study it, they would climb up a little bit, they'd get stuck, they'd come back down, they'd shake out their arms and legs, they'd look at it, think about it, they might lay down, think about it, It's a very cerebral sport for all of its physicality. But Adam decided he didn't want to do that. In climbing, if you start at the bottom and you go straight to the top without having to do it a second time, it's called flashing it. Flashing it is a big deal. You get extra points if you flash something. And he decided he wanted to flash this climb. He wanted to arrive at the start, at the bottom, and go straight to the top without getting off. He wanted to do something that no one else had ever done before on this wall. And I want you to watch what happens in the last minute of this climb.
It felt like nothing could really stop me. I just kept going. And the dream was done.
you see how much he believes in the guy at the bottom who is acting as his belay? Like, it's not me at the top of the 20-foot ropes course, terrified to even look over the edge. It's not Trevor having carefully worked his way a little bit up at a time, testing the rope as he went at each stage in the process. No, after decades of climbing and depending on his ropes and his harnesses and his belay team and his safety checks, this is full-scale, all-out belief. The kind that doesn't even have to wonder whether it will hold him. The kind that allows him the most intense and full-out expression of joy I have ever seen at the end of a climb. So check out how our passage ends. Some of the official servants met him along the road and told him, "Your son is better." He asked them when the boy got better, and they answered, "The fever left him yesterday at 1 o'clock." The boy's father realized that at 1 o'clock the day before, Jesus had told him, "Your son will live." So the man and everyone in his family put their faith in Jesus. The NRSV says, the man and everyone in his family believed in Jesus. He started out with enough belief or enough desperation or both to make the trip from Capernaum to Cana. He got to Cana and he had his conversation with Jesus and he believed enough to start on the way home. But on the way home, the news comes to him. His son is better. The fever has left him. And it went at exactly the same moment as Jesus had declared his son would be made well. This is not a coincidence. There can be no other explanation. And so with this good news that Nathan was talking about last week, fresh on his mind, bubbling over onto his lips and energizing him, he rushes home. And I get the feeling that when he got close to home, he picked up the corners of his robe and he started running that last little bit of the way, running straight to his son, gathering him in his arms, hugging him, kissing him, tears streaming down his face in gratitude and relief and thanksgiving, the terror of the past week or month or year flowing out of him as he breathes in the calm, cool flesh of his son's brow, his strong, steady heartbeat flowing through into his arms and his clear, cheeky eyes, ready for a joke. And then the man starts to tell his story. He tells about his journey, the words tumbling over themselves, people from his household interrupting when they realized the absolutely identical timing of Jesus' declaration and the son's healing. And he and all his household believed. This is the belief of sheer ecstatic joy we just saw. This is the belief that now trusts that it is completely and totally safe. This is a belief that knows that Jesus is who he says he is and will do what he says he will do. What started out as I can only think of as mostly desperation, with this tiny kernel of possibility, had grown into maybe like a 50-50 hope, that it would actually happen. And then that 50-50 hope, it had morphed into this full-on, overwhelming evidence that was impossible to deny. His son who was going to die, was alive and well, jumping and dancing, eating him out of house and home again, and threatening to break something with all of his antics. The word belief is funny that way. I checked the Greek interlinear, which looks like this. It's this tool that we use to find out the original Greek meanings of the words that have been translated into English. And it's the same word in both of these cases, the Greek word episteusin. In fact, it's the same word as the one that shows up 244 times in the New Testament in various forms. And it's this idea of belief, it's really, really important to New Testament writers, you know? The CEV translation that we often use at Vox, it frequently renders it faith, but it's the same Greek word. It's the same idea, the same process or experience. This is the belief or faith in Jesus that's supposed to save us. It's the belief or faith in God that translates into actions that shape and remake the world around us. But when we talk about belief, sometimes we can talk about it like it's this fixed or stagnant experience. When I was a kid, I had this idea that to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ so that we would be saved was this singular event, like turning on a light switch. It was supposed to be a one-off decision that changed absolutely everything in an instant, and from which there was no going back. And it was presented as if all of our salvation was dependent on maintaining this exact feeling of belief at all times and in all seasons of life. Unsurprisingly, like many of the people I grew up with, I questioned my salvation every time that belief wavered or didn't seem up to the challenge of life in front of me. But the problem is, that's nothing like most of the examples of belief we find in the New Testament. And it's for sure not like what we find in this story. See, what we find in this story is this dynamic experiential process. There's this process of growth and response, belief, faith. It isn't summoning up all the trust in the rope that Andra had at the end of his climb out of nowhere. Belief is a process of trying even while we're scared. It's formed in testing and finding out over and over and over again that the framework and structure that is Jesus is trustworthy and reliable and can be depended upon. When we talk about faith, we're talking about this kind of ongoing process. When we talk about belief, we're talking about this process that takes whatever belief we have today and leans into it. When we talk about faith and belief, we're talking about this process that has space for our doubts and our uncertainties, our mistakes and our missteps, our as yet unmet longings and desires. We're talking about the intimacy of hearing God's still small voice audibly in our ear and the long dark night of the soul when we can't even fathom the possibility that God still exists and everything in between. All of this is the journey of faith and belief. All of this is what builds our ability to trust in Jesus. Like the royal official, belief builds on belief and then builds on belief again, but not without a dozen doubting moments for every step of the way to Cana and a dozen more for every step of the way back. All of those experiences are what build this kind of deeper, richer belief and trust. And so wherever you are right now, on your journey of faith, that's okay. We're not called to be somewhere we're not. We're just called to take the next step. If you barely had enough faith this morning to turn on the Vox live stream from your bed, that's okay. Just take the next step. If you can barely summon enough faith to reach out and pray, that's okay. Take that step. If you feel rebuffed by Jesus or the church or Christianity or faith itself, you are not alone, and that's okay. But take the next step. If you feel like Jesus has only given you answers that are esoteric and vaguely plausible, that's okay. Take the next step. If right now your faith is so deep that you could fling yourself off of the metaphorical mountainside of life, please, only the metaphorical one, not the literal one, trusting that faith and belief are strong enough to hold you, then take all the Adam Andra joy in that moment that you can take. Even if it feels like no one around you has that kind of faith right now, that is okay. Take joy in it. Record it. Take note of it. Because it will not always feel like this. And that's okay too. Because when that happens, you'll know deep down inside how to take the next step. I'll call the worship team back up. Let's pray.